The new house. It was the summer of 2007 when we moved into the new house. Excitement buzzed through the family as we unpacked boxes, imagining the life we'd build here. But little did we know, something else awaited us. A presence that would haunt our nights and challenge our sense of reality. The house was beautiful, located in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the small town of Crescent Hollow. It was everything we dreamed of: spacious rooms, a lush backyard, and an air of serenity. The first night was uneventful, with the usual chaos of settling in. But by the second night, serenity turned into dread. I woke to the sound of my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, screaming. Her voice echoed through the house, sharp and terrified. I rushed into her room, my heart pounding. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling by her bed. "There's a man in my room," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "He's standing in the corner." I froze. The room was empty except for her furniture and a pile of unpacked toys. I turned on the light and checked everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, even behind the curtains. There was no one there. "It's okay, Lily," I said, pulling her into my arms. "There's no one here." But as I tucked her back in, I couldn't shake the chill that crept up my spine. Her description stayed with me: a black man. As she put it, not in the sense of race, but a shadowy figure, featureless and ominous. That night, I barely slept, my ears tuned to every creak and groan of the house. A few nights later, the screams came again. This time, as I ran to her room, something happened that I'll never forget. As I climbed the stairs, reaching the landing, I felt it, a force, cold and strong, shoving me. I fell, tumbling down several steps, my body crashing against the wall. Pain shot through my shoulder, but my instinct as a mother overrode everything. I scrambled to my feet and rushed into Lily's room. "Mommy!" she cried, clinging to me. I heard him again. He was talking to me. Her words made my blood run cold. "What did he say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. It sounded like whispers. I hugged her tightly, anger bubbling beneath my fear. Whatever was in this house wasn't just scaring my daughter. It was hurting me now, and I wasn't about to let it win. The strange occurrences didn't stop. One night, as I washed dishes in the kitchen, I heard it, "Deb," my name, spoken clearly by a man's voice. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. I turned, expecting to see my husband, but the kitchen was empty. "Tom," I called, walking to the staircase. I could hear him snoring upstairs. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whatever had called my name wasn't him. For a moment, I stood there, paralyzed with fear. Then I forced myself to move, retreating to the living room and leaving the dishes undone. I didn't tell Tom about it. He was skeptical of anything supernatural and would likely brush it off. By this point, I had started to feel uneasy in my own home. Even during the day, the house seemed darker than it should have been. Shadows lingering in corners where there shouldn't be any. One evening, as I sat at my old desktop computer, I saw it again. The screen reflected the room behind me, and there it was, the same shadowy figure Lily had described, standing just a few feet away. My heart stopped. I spun around, expecting to find someone there, but the room was empty. I told myself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. The figure was too real, too vivid to be a mere illusion. When I was alone in the house, the silence wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. I began to hear things I couldn't explain. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. Faint whispers floated through the air, and doors would creak open on their own. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the bedroom, I heard heavy footsteps upstairs. I froze, my mind racing. Tom was at work, and Lily was at school. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and crept upstairs, my hands shaking. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling, but the house was silent. I searched every room, but I found nothing. Desperate for an explanation, I began researching the house's history. I learned that it had been built in the 1980s and had only 2 previous owners. There were no reports of violent deaths or tragic events. I even looked into the area's history, wondering if the land had some dark past. But there was nothing, no old burial grounds, no haunted legends. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, a woman named Evelyn, who agreed to visit the house. She walked through each room, her expression growing more serious with every step. "There's definitely a presence here," she said finally. "It's strong, and it's not happy." Her words confirmed what I already knew, but knowing didn't make it any easier to live with. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I stood in the living room, the house eerily quiet around me. "Whoever you are," I said aloud, my voice firm, "this is my house now. You're not welcome here." For a moment, the air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on me. Then, just as suddenly, it lifted. I didn't know if my words had any effect, but it felt good to take a stand. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, but it didn't last. The activity escalated one last time. One evening, as I sat reading in bed, the lights flickered, and the room grew cold. The shadow figure appeared, more vivid than ever, standing at the foot of my bed. This time, it didn't stay silent. "Leave," it said, the voice deep and guttural. Fear gripped me, but I forced myself to speak. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "This is my home." The figure faded, but the sense of dread lingered. That was the last time I saw it. But I often wonder if it's still here, watching, waiting. To this day, I don't know what haunted our home or why. Was it a restless spirit, a shadow person, or something else entirely? Whatever it was, it left a mark on us, a reminder that some things in this world defy explanation. Even now, years later, when I hear an unexplained creak or feel a sudden chill, I can't help but wonder if it's come back. The Haunting of Cedarwood Hollow. In 2014, I spent 2 weeks at my friend Alex's house in Cedarwood Hollow, a quiet, picturesque town tucked away in the hills of northern Oregon. He had just undergone surgery and needed help during his recovery. I was more than willing to assist. After all, Alex and I had been best friends since college. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly our lives would spiral into a nightmare that neither of us could fully comprehend. Alex's house was a charming 2-story building on the edge of town, surrounded by dense forest. The house had an old, rustic feel to it, with wooden beams and creaky floors that added to its character. I arrived on a sunny afternoon in late October, greeted by the crisp air and the scent of pine trees. "How's the patient?" I asked as I stepped through the door, balancing a casserole dish in one hand and an overnight bag in the other. Alex grinned, his face pale but cheerful. "I've been better, but at least I have my personal chef and nurse now." The first few days were uneventful. I cooked meals, kept the house tidy, and made sure Alex took his medication on time. We spent our evenings watching movies or reminiscing about old times. It felt good to help my friend, and I was grateful for the chance to reconnect after years of busy schedules. It was the 4th night when things began to feel off. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it 3 distinct knocks. They were faint but deliberate, echoing through the quiet house. I froze, straining my ears. "Alex!" I called out, but there was no answer. Thinking he might need help, I got up and went to his room. He was sound asleep, his breathing steady. I checked the rest of the house, but everything was as it should be. I shrugged it off, blaming it on the old house settling. The next morning, Alex mentioned something strange over breakfast. "Did you hear anything last night?" he asked, sipping his coffee. "Like what?" I asked, trying to gauge his tone. "Knocking. Around midnight." My stomach tightened. I heard it too. We exchanged uneasy glances but decided not to dwell on it. It was probably just the house, we told ourselves. Later that afternoon, I decided to organize the garage. Alex had been meaning to clean it out for years, and it seemed like a productive way to pass the time. As I sorted through boxes of old tools and holiday decorations, I felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. Then it happened. One of the shelves, an old, heavy wooden one, came crashing down, narrowly missing me. The sound was deafening, and I jumped back, heart racing. Alex hobbled into the garage a few moments later, alarmed by the noise. "What happened?" "The shelf fell," I said, pointing to the mess. "But I didn't touch it." He frowned, inspecting the brackets. "These are secure. There's no way it just fell on its own." We cleaned up the mess in silence, both of us uneasy but unwilling to voice our concerns. The following night, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I saw it. A dark figure, just at the edge of my vision. It moved quickly across the hallway, disappearing into the living room. My heart pounded as I stood frozen, gripping the counter for support. "Alex!" I called out. "I'm in here," he replied from his room. I walked cautiously into the living room, my eyes scanning every corner. There was nothing there, but the air felt heavy, charged with an inexplicable energy. When I told Alex about it later, he admitted he'd been seeing shadows too. "I thought it was just me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The activity intensified over the next few days. We heard footsteps in the hallway, doors slamming shut on their own, and, most disturbingly, found scratches on the walls. They were long and jagged, as if made by claws. One morning, I woke up to find Alex sitting on the couch, his face pale and his hands trembling. "It attacked me," he said. "What?" I rushed to his side. Examining him, there were fresh scratches on his arm, deep and angry looking. "I was lying in bed when I felt something grab me," he explained. "I couldn't see it, but it was strong. My first instinct was to call for help. But who would we call? The police? An exorcist? Neither option felt right. By this point, we knew we couldn't stay in the house any longer. Whatever was in there wasn't just trying to scare us. It was trying to hurt us. We packed our bags quickly, planning to stay at a motel until we figured out what to do next. As we drove down the winding road away from the house, the forest on either side loomed dark and oppressive. Alex was behind the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Then, out of nowhere, a shadow appeared in the middle of the road. It was tall and humanoid, but its features were indistinct. Alex swerved to avoid it, and the car skidded off the road, crashing into a tree. When I regained consciousness, the first thing I saw was Alex slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Alex!" I shouted, shaking him awake. "I'm okay," he muttered, groaning in pain. "What happened?" "The shadow," I said, my voice shaking. "It was in the road. We never went back to that house." Alex eventually sold it, refusing to step foot inside again. I spent weeks researching paranormal phenomena, trying to make sense of what we experienced. Was it a spirit? A demon? Something else entirely? I found countless stories of people encountering similar entities, but no definitive answers. To this day, I'm haunted by the memories of that time. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear faint knocking or see shadows moving just out of the corner of my eye. I can't help but wonder if it followed us, if it's still watching. The story of Cedarwood Hollow is one I share not to frighten, but to seek understanding. If you've ever experienced anything like this, you know the helplessness, the fear, the unshakable sense that something beyond our comprehension is out there. And if you haven't, I hope you never do. The Vanishing Passenger. It was a cold December night in 2015 when I, a university student from the quiet village of Himapet near the hills of Mahipur, experienced something that still leaves me with sleepless nights. At the time, I was studying literature at a nearby university and would often travel late at night between the town of Mahipur and my village. Little did I know, one particular journey would blur the lines between the real and the unexplained. The air was crisp, and the moon cast a pale light over the narrow, winding roads as I drove my old motorbike home. The path to Himapet was a mix of dense forest and open fields, often devoid of any signs of life after sunset. That night, I had stayed late at a friend's place, helping him prepare for his final exams. By the time I left, it was well past midnight. The first stretch of the road was uneventful, the only sounds being the hum of my engine and the occasional rustle of leaves. As I approached the forested area near Cottery Creek, my headlights caught the figure of a man standing by the roadside. He was dressed oddly for the cold weather, wearing a simple white kurta and loose trousers, as though he had just stepped out of a bygone era. His face was gaunt, and his eyes seemed to pierce through the night. I slowed down instinctively, unsure whether to stop or keep going. Before I could decide, the man stepped forward and raised his hand in a gesture of request. "Could you give me a ride to Bahadurpur?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. Something about him felt off, but I couldn't just leave him stranded. The thought of karma lingered in my mind, and so I nodded, motioning for him to hop onto the back of my bike. As we rode on, the silence between us grew heavier with each passing minute. He sat stiffly behind me, his grip on the backseat firm yet unnervingly cold. I tried to make conversation, asking him where he was coming from and why he was traveling so late. His answers were short and vague. "I was visiting someone," he said flatly. When I glanced at him in the mirror, his expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The man's kurta, for instance, seemed too pristine for someone who had been out in the countryside all day. And then there was the strange chill emanating from him. It was as if his very presence lowered the temperature around us. After about 20 minutes, we reached the outskirts of Bahadurpur. The man asked me to stop near an old banyan tree that stood like a sentinel at the edge of the village. "This is my stop," he said, stepping off the bike. "Thank you for your kindness." I nodded, relieved to see him go. But as I turned my bike to head back to the road, he said something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Be careful on your way back," he warned, his voice suddenly deeper, almost echoing. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. The ride back to Himapet felt longer than usual. The man's words replayed in my head, and I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. When I finally reached home, My mother was waiting, her face a mixture of relief and worry. "Why are you so late?" she asked. "I gave someone a ride," I replied, recounting the strange encounter. Her face paled. "What did he look like?" she asked, her voice trembling. I described the man, and her reaction only deepened my unease. "That sounds like the man people talk about, the one who died near Cottery Creek years ago," he said to appear on the road, asking for rides to Bahadurpur. I froze. "What do you mean?" "I just dropped him off." She shook her head. "No one has ever seen him after dropping him off. He always disappears." Unable to sleep, I decided to ask around the next day. My friends dismissed it as a prank or my imagination running wild. But one of them, Raj, grew serious when I mentioned the banyan tree. "I've heard this story before," Raj said. "My uncle mentioned giving a man a ride years ago. He vanished as soon as they reached Bahadurpur. My uncle never spoke of it again." Determined to find answers, I visited Bahadurpur later that evening. The villagers were reluctant to speak about the man. When I described him, an elderly woman finally broke her silence. "That sounds like Ramesh," she said. "He was a wanderer who used to visit our village years ago. He died in an accident near Cottery Creek one stormy night. Since then, people say his spirit roams the road, asking for rides." The more I learned, the more the pieces of the puzzle didn't fit. If it was Ramesh, why was his spirit still lingering? Was he seeking help? Or was it something darker? I returned to the banyan tree, hoping to find some clue, but there was nothing unusual about the spot. Just an old, gnarled tree surrounded by silence. I couldn't stop thinking about the chill I had felt, the cryptic warning he gave me, and the way he vanished into the shadows. I decided to share my experience online, hoping someone might have an explanation. To my surprise, I received dozens of responses, many describing similar encounters on the same road. As time went on, the story of the vanishing passenger became an obsession. I visited local archives, searching for records of Ramesh's death, but found nothing definitive. The villagers of Bahadurpur refused to speak further, and even Raj's uncle avoided the topic. To this day, I wonder about the man I gave a ride to. Was he truly a lost spirit? Or was it a trick of the mind? An illusion born from exhaustion and the eerie stillness of the night? Sometimes, when I'm alone on the road late at night, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a familiar figure in white sitting silently behind me. And every time I pass by the banyan tree near Bahadurpur, I feel a chill run down my spine, as though someone or something is still watching. The story of the vanishing passenger remains a mystery. Villagers in Himapet and Bahadurpur occasionally whisper about the man who asks for rides on moonlit nights, but no one has seen him since. Whether he was a ghost, a figment of my imagination, or something else entirely, I may never know. But one thing is certain, that night changed me. It taught me that some questions are meant to remain unanswered and that the road home is not always as empty as it seems. The Whispering Shadows of Maple Grove. It was a warm summer evening in 2017 when I moved into the charming old house of my new husband, David, in the quiet town of Maple Grove, nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest. Built in 1959, the house exuded character with its creaky wooden floors, floral wallpaper, and large bay windows that overlooked a garden teeming with roses and lavender. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect place to start our married life. Little did I know, the house harbored secrets far older than our vows. About a month after our wedding, David and I were settling into a routine. It was an ordinary night when it all began. We had just gone to bed around 11 p.m. The faint hum of the garden crickets wafting through the open window. I nestled against David, my head resting on his shoulder, while the soft glow of his bedside lamp illuminated the room. As the silence deepened, I heard it, a soft, drawn-out sigh. It wasn't mine, nor David's. It was distinctly feminine, as though a woman stood beside the bed, exhaling close to my ear. My body stiffened, and a chill crept up my spine. "David," I whispered, sitting up abruptly. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, his expression calm, almost indifferent. "Yeah, I've heard it before," he said, his tone dismissive, as though the sound was no more troubling than a creaky floorboard. He rolled over, ready to drift off to sleep, but I sat frozen, my heart pounding. "Before," I pressed. "What do you mean?" David shrugged. "This house is old. Sometimes it makes noises. It's nothing." Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound wasn't the house settling or the wind. It was too distinct, too human. That night, I barely slept, my ears straining for any other signs of movement. David worked as a paramedic, and his schedule often required overnight shifts. One such night, about 2 weeks after the Psy incident, I found myself alone in the house. I decided to sleep on David's side of the bed, partly out of a desire for change and partly because it felt safer somehow. I turned on the bedside lamp and opened a book, trying to ignore the growing unease that settled over me whenever I was alone. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Just as I began to lose myself in the pages of my novel, I heard it again, the same soft, feminine sigh, so close it felt as though someone was leaning over my shoulder. My breath caught in my throat, and I clutched the blanket tightly. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling, but the room remained silent. The sound was identical to what I'd heard that first night. Deliberate, unmistakable, and unsettling. I wanted to run, to leave the house and wait for David to return. But fear kept me rooted in place. Instead, I left every light in the bedroom on and stayed awake until dawn. The next morning, I recounted the experience to David. This time, his reaction was different. He seemed hesitant, as though debating whether to tell me something. "There's something I should probably mention," he began, his voice cautious. "Before I bought this house, it belonged to an elderly woman named Eleanor. She lived here alone for years and passed away in the master bedroom. She was bedridden for a long time before she died." I stared at him, my heart sinking. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" David shrugged apologetically. "I didn't think it was relevant. Besides, I've never experienced anything other than the occasional sound." Despite his attempt to downplay the significance, I couldn't stop thinking about Eleanor. Was it possible that her spirit lingered in the house? And if so, why? In the weeks that followed, the sighs stopped, and I began to convince myself that the incidents were just figments of my imagination. But then other things started happening. One evening, while David was working late, I decided to sit on the porch and enjoy the cool night air. The garden was bathed in moonlight, the roses casting long shadows across the ground. As I sipped my tea, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A dark figure, faint and translucent, stood among the flowers. It appeared to be a woman, her outline shimmering like a mirage. She was facing the house, her posture rigid, as though she were watching me. I froze, unable to look away. The figure didn't move but seemed to dissolve into the night air as I blinked. Gathering my courage, I stepped into the garden, my flashlight in hand, but there was nothing there, just the rustling of leaves and the faint scent of lavender. One afternoon, while cleaning the house, I decided to tackle the attic. David rarely used it, and I thought it would be a good place to store some of our wedding gifts. As I climbed the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, and a faint smell of mothballs filled my nostrils. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and an antique vanity covered in dust. As I moved a box to make space, I noticed a locked trunk in the corner. The key was still in the lock, and curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a collection of photographs, letters, and a worn journal that belonged to Eleanor. Flipping through the pages, I realized they were filled with entries about her life in the house. But toward the end, the tone shifted. She wrote about feeling watched, hearing whispers, and seeing shadows. One entry, in particular, stood out. They come at night. They don't mean to scare me, but I feel their sadness. This house holds their secrets. The activity in the house escalated after I discovered the journal. Doors would open and close on their own. Objects would move inexplicably, and the shadowy figure began appearing more frequently. David, ever the skeptic, dismissed my concerns as stress or overactive imagination. But I knew better. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Assuming it was David, I called out, but there was no response. The footsteps grew louder, stopping just outside the bedroom door. The handle turned slowly, and the door creaked open, revealing nothing but an empty hallway. And then, I heard it, the sigh, louder this time, accompanied by a faint whisper I couldn't make out. I clutched the blanket, my heart pounding. As the room grew colder, the shadow appeared again, standing at the foot of the bed, his presence undeniable. A few months later, we decided to move. The experiences had become too much for me to bear, and even David admitted that the house felt different. As we packed our belongings, I couldn't help but wonder if Eleanor's spirit was truly at rest, or if the house's secrets ran deeper than we could ever understand. To this day, I think about the sighs, the shadows, and the whispers. Did Eleanor linger out of attachment to her home, or was something else drawing her back? And what of the other presences she wrote about in her journal? Were they bound to the house as well? We never learned the full story of Eleanor or the history of the house. After we moved, I often wondered about the new owners and whether they experienced anything similar. Perhaps the house has its own way of keeping its secrets, whispering them only to those who dare to listen. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight, exploring these mysterious and spine-chilling stories. If these tales have sparked your curiosity or left you with unforgettable feelings, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've had similar paranormal experiences that you'd like to share, feel free to send your story to the email address provided in the description. Who knows? Your story might become part of our journey into the spiritual world in a future episode. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our haunting tales. See you in the next episode, and remember, always keep a light by your side.